welcome to the new Sensibility magazine edition. This week, this month even, we are talking about the subject of stress. And specifically in this interview, we're going to be looking at how stress and anxiety are related and how the Feldenkrais method can be a useful resource if anxiety is an experience or something you experience. So today, I'm delighted to have someone who I would say is an expert on this subject, and that is Molly Tipping, and she's actually from the Australian Feldenkrais Guild. She's based in Perth, I believe. Yes. So I'm really grateful for her for coming on, talking about the subject. She has a lot of experience talking about it in universities and working with people individually. So I think it's a really great resource, and I'm very excited to talk about this subject, it being an important subject in my life as well. So welcome, Molly. Nice to have you on.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, just kind of giving a little bit of background about yourself, maybe how you related to the Feldenkrais method initially, and what your experience with anxiety, the subject of anxiety, is.
Yeah, so I come from a dance background initially, and I did the Feldenkrais training initially sort of under someone else's suggestion, and I kind of went into the training and sort of started doing the training. And as a dancer, it's one of those things where the kind of movements of the training were interesting. I enjoyed them, and we kind of got into that a little bit. But the thing that happened for me during the training is that I would stand up after a lesson and I would feel my feet on the ground. I would feel like I was in my body. I would feel like I could think clearly. My emotional kind of ease was fantastic. And that was the thing that got me hooked on Feldenkrais, was really actually this method is going to help me. It's going to help me feel calm. It's going to help me feel grounded. And that's how really what I fell in love with the method for. And then as I was going through the training, of course, then reading Moshe Feldenkrais and reading all about his ideas and his thoughts on anxiety, I was like, this is fantastic. And this is pretty much where I have pursued my interest in the method, is to really go into embodiment, grounding, anxiety regulation, emotional potency, all of those kinds of realms. I also work at a performing arts university, and at the performing arts university, I teach students and we look at performance anxiety specifically. And so there I get to specifically look at how I could use Feldenkrais and somatic practice to help them with their performance readiness, and also to help them to recover from their intensity of performances. So yeah, so I think that's kind of been a personal kind of interest of mine, is I've just really appreciated having this method for regulating my nervous system and regulating my emotions. And I've also made it my profession. So I work privately with people, but also at the university, I support those university students through their performances and through their 3-year degree, which can be very, very intense.
So I think there's probably quite a lot that we could get into in relation to performance anxiety as a subject. I want to kind of backtrack a little from that and talk about anxiety just in general first. So my initial question is, what is anxiety and how does it relate to stress?
Yes. And so I think this is a really interesting thing, and probably each of us would have a kind of way that we would recognize I feel stressed or I feel anxious, and they might be the same thing. So some people might kind of feel like they're exactly the same thing. But I'll give you an example for me of the difference between stress and anxiety. So last week I was on holidays. And so when I'm on holidays, I'm not stressed or anxious. I'm just having a great time, living my life. And but as I was kind of coming towards the end of my holiday, and then I was kind of realizing that I was heading back to work, I started to feel anxiety. I started to feel this kind of shift in my excitation, or the sort of tingly, buzzy feeling in my body. My tummy and my head started kind of getting a bit whirly. And that was an anxiety feeling, but I didn't have anything to do, right? So I wasn't actually under pressure. Now, as I'm getting back into work, my anxieties are starting to reduce, but my stress is going up. So my stress is that I have high load, high expectations, highly timetabled life. I've got a lot to do, a lot of demands, a lot of things that I'm managing. And so for me, the sort of anxiety stress is sometimes that they can kind of push each other out. So if I'm stressed, I maybe don't feel anxious. If I'm anxious, I maybe am anxious, but I'm not stressed. And then, of course, we can be stressed and anxious at the same time. We have a lot going on, a lot of output, a lot of demands on us, and we're feeling that kind of woozy, kind of, panicky kind of feeling at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of see it as a sort of spectrum of those emotional nervous system experiences that can be that there's neither of those things. There's one or the other, or there's both. So maybe simply I'd say stress is load and anxiety is a kind of caution, fear response.
That's really useful to help understand that. Just as a follow-up question, I mean, you mentioned sort of like the nervous system a little and emotional responses and things like that. So, I mean, I think it's probably useful to help us understand anxiety. Is it, to ask the question, is it a mental experience or a physical experience? And obviously I'm asking that a little bit sort of, antagonistically, but, I hopefully it kind of, cues you up in a nice way to answer that.
Yes. So I think as a somatic practitioner, we're much more kind of spending time with the physiological experience. But for a lot of people, the conversation around anxiety has been much more of a psychological one. When I'm working with my students, the thing that I talk about is the nervous system. So I talk about the autonomic nervous system, and in particular, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems, and how our nervous system is adjusting to our environment, because ultimately that's all the nervous system is there for. It is to attune our physiology to the environment that we are in. And so we're shifting between sympathetic and parasympathetic states of the nervous system. And when I am in an environment that's particularly sympathetic or particularly active, I might be kind of in that sympathetic state. So when there's a lot going on, when there's a lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of light, a lot of busyness, my nervous system will shift into a sympathetic state to match that environment. And then when I come home and, the lights are dim and it's the end of the day and maybe I sort of slow down and read a book, my system will shift into that parasympathetic state. So sometimes when we talk about it as, is it mental or is it not mental, we can think about it more kind of simply, which is as an organism, as an individual, my whole nervous system, which includes my brain, the brain is just the organ of the nervous system in the same way that the stomach is the organ of the digestive system. So my nervous system and brain can get busy and can get like paying attention, thinking really fast, picking up details, analyzing, problem solving. That's going to be sympathetic. And so what is often happening when we're thinking about it as a psychological thing, we're just talking about that one element of the entire state change. We're saying, my brain is really busy. I've got a headache. I can't stop thinking. That is just a sympathetic activation of the brain, of the nervous system. Or we might have an anxiety response. We're like, my brain goes blank and I can't think. And that would be a kind of a parasympathetic sort of stress response. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But when I'm working with my students, I'm trying to get them to understand we don't want to think just in psychological terms because it doesn't give us the full picture. The full picture is you have an entire nervous system state change, which includes changes in digestion, changes in the temperature of your body, changes in the muscular activity, whether we're tense or whether we go floppy and relaxed, changes in heart rate, our breathing, like hormonally, There are so many changes. That thinking patterning that we get into when we're in a state of stress or when we're in an anxious state is only one tiny element of the entirety of the state change. Now, I do recognize that that can be very overwhelming, and that's what people notice. I can't stop noticing my racing thoughts, and that's absolutely fine. But with the students, I tend to just say, as a general rule, when you notice that, you've just got too much blood in your brain. Like that, there's too much sympathetic activation. So go and do something that's going to get you out of a sympathetic state. Don't even try to analyze your thinking. Just shift the nervous system state. Then the blood will come out of your brain. It'll go back to your digestive organs. Then the speed of the neural firing will decrease. Oh, then you'll be able to think more calmly. So the thing for me is that I'm looking more holistically, and that includes all of the organ systems, all of the muscular systems. And, you know, that's particularly what the nervous system is coordinating. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really nice way to help people understand how the psychological state and the physical state are connected. That we've got this nervous system that's kind of communicating messages throughout all of that system. You know, and really to think of them as separate is not correct, because your mental and emotional state has a physiological element, and all of your physiological experiences have a mental and emotional element. So you can't really separate them.
No,
okay,
we're just one person, you know, like that's the thing. We're just a single entity. We're not pieces, you know, like it's like actually the whole of me is experiencing this threat at the moment.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, moving on to, I mean, the relationship so what we've talked about so far is that there's a physical component to Feldenkrais, to anxiety. My question then comes up is, why is Feldenkrais a good solution, or is Feldenkrais a good solution, given that we work with the body and we work with movement within the Feldenkrais method?
Yeah. Look, for me, it's probably the most important element of my stress and my anxiety kind of management system. And there's a few reasons or a few ways that I use it. One is a daily practice. So I would get up in the morning and I would lie on the floor and I will move my body and I will stretch and I will roll and I will engage in movement that way. Of course, I exercise as well. I, you know, swim and do yoga, and I do go to the stairs and run up and down them. So I'm doing other kinds of physical activities. But the difference with Feldenkrais compared to other exercise or active modalities is when I lie on that floor, I check in to my nervous system. I check into my body. I check into me in a very deeply kind of unedited way. I don't have a task to kind of like busy my brain with how I'm feeling. And because the way that we work in a Feldenkrais class, we have periods of activity where we're doing movement, and it could be rolling, something kind of really gentle and beautiful, could be something complex. But after we've done a little bit of that movement, we then rest again. And built into the methodology of the Feldenkrais is this active rest rhythming. And as I engage in that active rest rhythm, I really help to regulate my nervous system. I really help to check in and go, oh, am I feeling really kind of active and ready and full of enthusiasm today? Or am I feeling really slow and like I just need a little extra rest here? And so the kind of structure of a Feldenkrais lesson really allows me to connect deeply with the state of my nervous system and to really start to work in sync with it. And so that's for me a really important element, is that kind of daily practice. The other one is that I would use Feldenkrais before I'm going to an event, and I work with my students in this way. So you're about to go on stage. You've got a performance coming up. How are we going to work so that we can actually calm our nervous system down if we're feeling way too agitated. And we might calm our nervous system down through some changes in posture, through some changes in our gaze, through some movements with our hands. There's these really gentle movements we do in Feldenkrais. We call them the bell hand. I sometimes call them just seaweed fingers. Just really slow, gentle movements with the hands. We might gently breathe out and change the way we're breathing. We could just slow our movement down and kind of do more swaying type movements. So there's a whole heap of physiological changes we can make that would actually create a nervous system shift. So if I'm feeling too activated, I can change my nervous system state through posture, through breath, through the activation of the muscles. I can relax the muscles. I can sit back in my chair and get more comfortable. There's things I can do in my body and in my nervous system that will actually calm my entire system down. Or maybe I turn up to an event and I'm thinking, goodness, I'm feeling really sluggish and I can't be bothered doing this thing. Well, actually, I can activate the muscles. I can come into extension. I can breathe in. I can actually breathe quickly. I can stamp my feet. I can actually wake my nervous system up. I can activate the sympathetic aspect of the nervous system. And that's going to actually help reduce my stress, because if I'm feeling like I have to do something quite energetic and complex, but I'm feeling really sluggish and like kind of drawn back in myself, then I'm mismatched to the moment. So I can use my knowledge of bodily posture changes and little movement lessons that I've learned through Feldenkrais to kind of get myself ready for that moment.
Mm.
The other thing is off the back of a performance. So let's say I've had a really big performance and I've worked so hard and it's been like intense. Maybe I've moved house. Maybe I've, just had like a massive work day. At the end of the day, I then have all these beautiful restorative practices within the Feldenkrais method that I can actually then bring my nervous system back down off that peak. I can then help to regulate it again so I can fall asleep at night and then I can start the day freshly renewed. So the thing for me with Feldenkrais is that there's lots of moments in my life where I'm deliberately using it, either as a daily practice or in the moment. But there's also this other thing that I might do, which is really in the moment. So let's say I'm having this conversation with you, Joe, right? So I'm talking with you and I'm thinking, I'm feeling a bit kind of activated. I can be really interested in a question which I get my students to really start to ask themselves all the time, which is, could this be easier? Could I talk to Joe and it feel easier? Could I talk to Joe and it feels more comfortable? What would I do? I might change my posture. I might slow my voice down. Now, I haven't told myself what I'm going to do, but I ask the question, could this be easier? Could it be more comfortable? And my nervous system will give me clues. Another one is, can I do the exact same thing with less effort? And I've got students who have been playing, their guitars, or who have been doing ballet, who have been doing very demanding things. And they ask themselves all the time, can I do this activity with less effort? And they learn to change how much energy they're using in that activity. And they actually say, oh my God, that class was so much easier. I can play for longer. I don't get stressed as much because I have more efficiency and my sustainability's gone up. So that's a kind of long-term adjustment as well, is that I'm actually starting to turn up to my life and encouraging my students to find ways to turn up to their life where it actually just gets easier and easier and easier. And that's a skill set or a refinement of the way that we do things.
I mean, it's really great the way you're putting all of this. I can kind of identify a couple of sort of key messages in there. One is that, anxiety as an experience has this sort of short-term system overload, and that can be quite a scary experience. You can feel your heart racing, maybe you start sweating, or even people get dizzy as a result of anxiety. And that what you've said there is that there are some concrete tools to help someone deal with that experience in the moment, focusing on the breath, feeling more comfortable in themselves, maybe even stepping away from the situation, different things that people can do in the moment. But you've also identified that some aspect of this has to do with how the person is in themselves in general, and teaching them through the lens of the Feldenkrais method how to access easy movement or more comfortable movement, gives them to use your words, skills in relation to listening to themselves and changing their own experience. So I think that, both of those things are really important for this subject. One, we need something to deal with the in the moment experience, and also something to help us, sort of deal with the more long-term experience of anxiety, where it's not just about the in the moment sensation, it's more about what I'm doing with myself, how I relate to myself. Can life be easier or more comfortable? And maybe that gives a route out of anxiety in some way.
Yeah. I think, there's two really big things there. One is the method really teaches us to start to know ourselves, to be on our own side, to be kind to ourselves, to really honor our active and rest cycles, to really honor the sensations and the experiences that we are having in the world, and to not fight them. So that's a really important long-term adjustment that I feel I see this in Feldenkrais practitioners. We really start just allowing ourselves to be ourselves. We stop fighting ourselves and trying to squish ourselves into being perfect people to fit neatly into some imaginary box of what we should be in the world. And we start to just be actually, this is what feels good for me. But it doesn't come from a place of me thinking about it. It comes from this very deeply felt sense of, oh, this is just what works for me. And then the more that we do that, that really starts to shift our anxiety, because then I'm living from within my experience. I'm really honoring who I am in the world, what I need in the world, what is right for me. And the more I feel that, the more I'm able to then say to someone, hey, I think I work better in this way. Or I think if our relationship is going to work well, this is going to work for me if we do it like this. So we have the felt experience, and then we develop that kind of verbalizing skills of being able to communicate our felt experience to others. But that's really because in the method, we're really helping people to go, this is who you are. And you're perfectly gorgeous the way you are. And we don't need to go kind of, squeezing you into some imaginary box of perfection. And then the second one is that the method is so wonderfully interested in maturation, in learning, in the potential of how we can be in the world. And so when we kind of eventually come onto our own sides and start to live from within our experience, and then start kind of making forward progress from this place, the next question is, well, what do you want to learn? What are you interested in? What challenges do you have? And we have created this beautiful kind of system in Feldenkrais, or Moshe Feldenkrais obviously created this system where we give people challenges, we give them puzzles to solve, but we give them plenty of time to solve them. And we give them lots of opportunities to make mistakes, to figure things out, to try them one way, try them another way, and then make choices about what is working for them. And let's say we might be working on, a kind of series for headstands, right? So you think, oh, I can't do a headstand. That feels really overwhelming. We might take many weeks or many months even, where we would be building up towards, this kind of fascinating thing of standing on our head. Or sometimes, we do Feldenkrais lessons and, we're all tortured by them because we're like, this is so hard. I have no idea how I'm going to be able to do it. But we start to develop this real appreciation of being confused, this real appreciation of not knowing something. And we get really interested in, oh, well, I wonder how I could do that. Or I wonder, what would make it easier or what would help. And over time, we build up a whole heap of skills to be in situations that are confusing, to be in situations that are difficult, to be in situations where we have no idea what the outcome of this experience is going to be. And in a way, Feldenkrais gives us this opportunity to practice being in the real world, which is that it's confusing, it's challenging, it's overwhelming, it's complex. And then we build skills. We build skills in a number of ways. We build skills in being in those unfamiliar spaces. And I literally can turn up to now places where I don't have a lot of information about what's going to happen, but I feel very comfortable to be in that unfamiliar place. I am comfortable in myself to be like, oh, well, let's just see how this goes. And so I have skills in the unfamiliar. I have skills in the complex. I have skills in the challenging, where I'm not forcing something. I'm finding my way with it. But the other thing for me, and I talk about this a lot with the students, is the anxiety skill kind of relationship, which is if I said to you, Joe, oh, look, can you fill out this form for me? Like, you've come to see me as a client and I hand you this form and you fill it out. You won't really think much about it. You'll just fill out that form and you'll hand it back to me. But if you don't know how to read and write, and I hand you my form and I say, hey, can you fill in this form? That will very likely elicit an anxiety or a stress response in you, because you actually don't have the skills, or you haven't learned those nuanced actions in the world of how to write on a form. And so for a lot of us, we have a lot of anxiety and stress in places where we have lower skills or we have less experience in that place. So there's sort of two things. One, we get better at being in low skill environments or environments where we have low skill. And then the second one is that actually I just start becoming more skilled and more nuanced and capable. And actually that starts to reduce my anxiety because I realize, oh, no, it's okay. I got this. I can do this.
Yeah,
So that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, what I'm getting from what you're talking about, and sort of these are common words in this sort of anxiety field, but resilience, and building some ability to, through building up skill or resources in yourself, building some ability to deal with anxiety as part of the human experience, because it's a natural part of human experience and we're going to have it. It's not something we have a choice about. So in some way, it's worthwhile spending some time, if anxiety is a challenge for you, to build up some way that you can expose yourself to it in a safe way, which is kind of what you're saying. It's like making small experiments or introducing small challenges, and maybe that improves over time and you start to feel less challenged by the challenged.
And Feldenkrais is so great for that, because the challenges are arbitrary. They're meaningless, right? So we get an opportunity to be in a challenging situation, but whether we succeeded it or not doesn't equate to money in the bank, or doesn't equate to success from my boss saying you've done a good job. So it sort of removing it from the kind of impact of real life means I actually genuinely get to learn those skills. And it's fun. I mean, that's a great thing about Feldenkrais. You're in the middle of a lesson and, the teacher will suggest a movement to you and your little brain just goes, what? That's ridiculous. How can I do that? Or you'll be like, oh, that sounds a bit odd. But within this active rest rhythm, within the pacing of the Feldenkrais class, that you'll be given as much time as you need to kind of dabble and think about it. You might imagine it even, you might not even do it, but you'll be given so many tools to engage with that challenge, and they become lifelong skills that you use outside of that class.
Yeah. And that's where, you know, learning really comes into play in this subject. You know,
absolutely. And look,
learning how
as you
to
said
do
before,
things better in life, so that you encounter less of the I can't do something, therefore I feel anxious or stressed by it, you know, and knowing that you can learn it and it's okay for you to get it wrong as part of that learning process. So I have
look,
one.
you'd said before, you'd said before something about we're all going to experience anxiety, and I think we definitely are. I think if you're living a meaningful life, you know, you will have anxiety. I work with obviously performing artists, and you know, they're going to have a lot of anxiety, but they also love what they do, you know, and I have a lot of anxiety around being a parent, but I love being a parent. So sometimes I say to people, you know, if we swap the word anxiety for care, which is, I'm not anxious about that, I care about that. You know, if we think about who doesn't have anxiety, you know, we can say, well, actually, they don't care.
They don't care.
Like, so very sensitive, very caring people will also be the types of people who will also experience a lot of anxiety. And that is because they care deeply. What is happening is really important. So it is a really interesting thing sometimes to recontextualize anxiety. Yes, it can be a threat response in the system, and that's normal. And we want threat responses. People who don't have anxiety die much earlier. So it's great to have anxiety. It's going to live longer.
Like teenagers as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. They don't have as much anxiety, you know, and then they jump off of, you know, something silly, or they have a lot of anxiety, which keeps them really kind of, you know, contained. But that's okay too, because in a way, I've got teenagers, they're in this really interesting phase where they've got incredible anxiety that's just like through the roof, and then no anxiety. And they're trying to find much anxiety is a good amount of anxiety to actually turn up and be an adult in the world. And so it is okay that we've got these sometimes really extreme responses of anxiety, and then, hang on, perhaps I didn't have enough anxiety, because I liken this to learning how to handstand. You know, you've got to kind of go past that midline to learn where the actual middle is. And sometimes that's what we're doing with anxiety as well. We end up having really extreme anxiety responses, or we have no anxiety, and then later on gone, maybe I should have actually been a bit more anxious about that. You know?
For sure. No, that's great. That's a great way of understanding it. You know, that it's useful, and that we can learn how to experience anxiety just in the right way for us. you know.
And that exactly, and that's it. It's partly that thing of knowing ourselves and knowing all, like, the intimacy of how we work. And then it's partly about going, oh, but I can actually modify or moderate my anxiety response through my posture, through my breathing, through the way that I move, through the pace of my movement, all of these things which we learn in a Feldenkrais context, because we are a nervous system, physiology, body-based system. And all of those things that we learn in a Feldenkrais sort of space allows us to make those changes to actually feel like we can dance a bit with our anxiety. We can kind of bring it up or bring it down, depending on, you know, what we feel is probably more useful.
Yeah, I think it's a nice way of understanding the Feldenkrais method, in that it's like a training platform for life or something like that.
Feldenkrais is a training platform for life. It is absolutely the truth. It absolutely is. And I think that is why it is a lifelong modality that I will never stop doing Feldenkrais. Because I want to get better and better at living my life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and who doesn't really? You know,
who doesn't, Joe? That's right.
Great. Well, I'm super pleased. I've loved this. I think it's, you know, you can tell it's a subject that's close to my heart, and I can tell it's a subject that's close to your heart as well. So I think that's really nice. Just wondered if there's anything else that you would want to add to this at this point. We've covered a lot, but maybe there's something else that you'd want to say. No pressure.
Yeah, no, I think, look, I feel like that's probably good. I think just for a short little introduction, I feel like we've kind of thrown out a few little things, and I
Enough
suppose
to
actually
pique
there's
people's
one thing that
interest. Oh yeah, please.
there's one thing that we didn't talk about, which is the hands-on methodology of Feldenkrais.
Okay, yeah.
We've talked mostly about kind of learning it maybe kind of through movement. And it might be good just to actually talk a little bit about the hands-on method, in the sense that we also use touch in a hands-on setting. And we've talked about movement being really good for the nervous system, but actually touch for our nervous systems as humans, as mammals, touch is very regulatory for the nervous system. That's not to say if someone has anxiety, they want to be touched. They might actually not want to be touched at all. I do, work with clients in a one-on-one setting and there's no touch. But we may build up to touch at some point. There's something really beautiful about a hands-on experience that is so wonderful, because we can give our nervous system over to the sensitivities and the regulation of the person that is holding our bodies, or even just holding our person gently with their nervous system without putting their hands on us. And so for people who are very, very anxious, a one-on-one experience is going to be really beneficial, because my nervous system and your nervous system, I can really sense into where your nervous system is at, and I can help to calm it down or to awaken it in ways that in the beginning, with very anxious clients, they cannot generate on their own. They often need the support of another person to help them make those nervous system shifts. And that's maybe just something that sort of we won't talk too much about necessarily, but it's probably just good to differentiate being in a class and doing movement and breath and that kind of sort of group activity, or being one-on-one with somebody, and you may still be doing movement and breath, but you could also be doing some hands-on work. And the hands-on work is very profound because it is absolutely tuned to your nervous system, and that Feldenkrais practitioner has the most highly trained hands, I would say, of maybe any practitioner in the world. It's probably, like a little bit of a bias for Feldenkrais practitioners, but the trained sensitivity of the Feldenkrais practitioner's hands, I think, is exquisite. And so for stress and anxiety, if we are very, very stressed and very anxious, to have a one-on-one session where we're actually receiving a hands-on session can actually be an incredibly nourishing thing to do.
That's a great addition. I'm glad you brought it up. I think everyone's different in what they need. Some people might be able to take just some information that someone told them and integrate it. Some people may need to go to a class and feel the group element, and that's a nice way. Maybe social anxiety is part of their experience. So working sometimes in a class can be stressful. You then come to an individual lesson and you've got the support of someone directly, and that could be a good way for you to learn. So I think it's nice how you framed that, in that the method provides a way for each person to access themselves and get support. And it could be that that's self-directed, or it could be that they need assistance, and both are okay. And yeah, really, really nice addition. Thank you. Great. Okay, well, Molly, how can people get in touch with you, or study with you more if they're interested in this subject?
Yeah, so probably the simplest way is to my website is
Mhm.
tippingmotion.com.au. I have a YouTube channel which is Molly Tipping, so you can
Mhm.
just Google Molly Tipping, and I've got a number of talks on the nervous system or on various elements in the work that I do. I also have a Facebook page which is Molly Tipping. If you're a Facebook person, you can jump on there.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll add
yeah,
links
and
to all
I'm
of these things in the description. Don't worry. Yeah.
yeah, great. I've got a training happening in Melbourne for Feldenkrais practitioners.
Mhm.
There is also a one-day public workshop that will be part of that. So if you happen to be living in Melbourne, or are you happy to fly in from Sydney or Adelaide or somewhere else, that's happening in March. And I will be running more professional trainings of that kind of nature and public workshops in relation to anxiety through the
Great.
rest of this year and next year. So yeah, Facebook and the website will give you all information for that.
Well, thanks for everything that you do on this subject. I'm appreciative. Great.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Okay. All right. Well,
Thank
yeah,
you.
thanks for having you on, and thanks everyone for watching. I hope it's been useful to you. And see you next Sensibility edition.
Beautiful. See ya.
Bye, Molly.